Hey guys, tonight we step into a glow so steady you almost forget it's fire at all. You stand just inside a quiet chamber where the air feels warm in that soft, settled way you only get when flames have been tended with patience rather than fuss. The light from Hestia's hearth stays low and even, almost as if it's breathing with you, and for a moment you have the odd sensation that the whole room tilts around that tiny center of stillness. You probably won't survive this moment if you expect anything dramatic to happen, because Hestia's power is the kind that whispers instead of shouts, nudging you into comfort before you even realize it's working. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, tell me your location and your current time down in the comments. I always love seeing where you're watching from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You edge closer to the hearth, slowly, because the heat has that don't rush me personality, and you feel how everything in this space orbits the fire. The stones around it are worn smooth. The floor bears darkened lines from generations of offerings, and the air holds a faint resin scent from herbs burned long before you arrived. Historians still argue whether ancient worshippers tended the flame in shifts all day, or if small, clever oil mixtures help the fire maintain itself longer than a normal bundle of kindling should. Either way, you're standing in front of something that feels older than its bricks and more polite than any divine blaze has the right to be. Hestia herself is never shown stepping out from behind the warmth. She stays where the flame stays. A mainstream fact you might already know. She was the firstborn of the Olympian siblings, yet somehow the least loud about it, which is impressive considering her family includes an ocean wielder, a thunder thrower, and a goddess infamous for turning uninvited guests into wildlife. Hestia simply chose the hearth, the literal center of the home, as her kingdom. And honestly, after hearing about Zeus's workplace drama, you can't really blame her. Sometimes you just want to sit by the fire and not deal with lightning-based HR complaints. The quirky tidbit, though, is that ancient Greeks believed her flame didn't just warm a single house. It echoed across all hearths, meaning any household fire was symbolically connected to hers. That's right. Even without leaving her seat, she was basically running the ancient equivalent of a cozy Wi-Fi network where everyone got signal as long as they kept their embers alive. And no one had to reboot the router, which already makes her more powerful than any modern deity of internet service. You watch the sparks shift in gentle spirals, as if the fire is practicing slow breathing exercises. One ember drifts upward, and you swear it pauses midair before fading. The light flickers just enough to draw soft silhouettes on the wall, shapes of pottery, woven baskets, and a bundle of rushes waiting to be fed into the fire later. Nothing here competes for your attention. Everything leans inward toward warmth. When you place a hand near the flames, you don't feel the sharp bite of heat. Instead, you feel something rounder, calmer, like the fire would be offended if it startled you. And this tells you something essential about Hestia's role. She doesn't guard the flame by force, she guards it by presence. You get the sense that if she ever stood up, the world might wobble a little, the way a table shakes when someone removes the one stable centerpiece, keeping everything balanced. You glance around the chamber and notice how every detail is designed to guide the eye back to the hearth. Even the ceiling darkens gradually toward the center, gently funneling the smoke where it needs to go. People in the ancient world didn't always have chimneys, so a lot of soot drifted through open rafters or out doorways. Historians still debate how smoky indoor life actually was, but from where you stand, the air feels surprisingly breathable, like the fire is doing extra work to burn cleanly so you don't cough yourself out of a spiritual moment. A small clay bowl sits on a low ledge. Someone left grains inside, barley, maybe, and a splash of sweet wine, their surface glistening in the fire's reflection. Offerings to Hestia were simple, nothing flashy, nothing that would cause Hermes to brag that he got a better snack. These gestures didn't aim to impress, they aimed to acknowledge. You feel a quiet gratitude radiating from the bowl, and for a second you imagine leaving something of your own. Maybe not barley, you probably didn't carry any in your pockets, but even the thought counts. Another small joke sneaks into your head. If you ever hosted a dinner party in ancient Greece and forgot to honor Hestia first, the vibes were pretty much guaranteed to tank. Not because she'd smite you, she wasn't that type, but because people genuinely believed hospitality itself unraveled without her blessing. Picture inviting friends over and realizing you never metaphorically turned on the good energy switch. Guests would still eat your bread, but the conversation might drop to that awkward level where everyone suddenly comments on the weather. The fire shifts again, and the glow deepens into a tone you can almost feel on your eyelids. You take a small step back, letting the heat wash over you like a soft wave. You sense why Hestia doesn't wander. The world doesn't need her to move. It needs her to anchor, to sit, to keep being the point everything else can return to. Your shoulders drop without you telling them to. The warmth doesn't demand attention, but it quietly insists you rest. In a world full of gods sprinting across mythic landscapes, you've just met the one who rules by remaining. You stay by the warmth a little longer, letting the flame steady your breathing before you drift outward into the shape of the home around it. The room doesn't announce itself the way modern living spaces do. No giant couch demanding loyalty, no kitchen island trying to steal the spotlight. Instead, everything here has that quiet, I exist because someone needed me, not because I wanted attention vibe. The ancient Greek household feels like a collection of purposeful corners. Each one hums gently in the background, while the hearth holds the lead roll without ever raising its voice. You move through the interior at an unhurried pace, and the textures greet you first. Woven mats, clay jars with faint fingerprints still ghosting their surfaces, a loom leaning against a wall as if waiting for someone to wander by and pick up yesterday's rhythm again. Historians still argue whether looms stayed in the main room or were tucked into side chambers, but here, tonight, the loom sits close enough to the hearth that whoever weaves can feel a thread of warmth along their toes. It's the kind of detail that makes you realize ancient ergonomics were basically, does this reduce suffering? Good enough. A mainstream fact slips into your awareness. The hearth wasn't just the physical center of the Greek home, it was its legal and spiritual anchor. New family members, whether born, adopted, or married in, were symbolically welcomed to Hestia's fire. Without that moment, you weren't truly part of the household. Imagine showing up to a family reunion today and someone saying, "Hold on, you haven't warmed yourself at the official flame yet." You'd probably nod politely while doing frantic mental math about how to exit the conversation. As you walk a little farther from the fire, the shadows deepen, but they never feel lonely. Hestia's warmth follows in an almost polite way, never chasing you, but always close enough to remind you that you can return with one quiet step. You pass shelves lined with pots sealed in beeswax. Some likely hold olive oil, others herbs, others maybe the ancient equivalent of, "Don't touch, this is for guests." One jar has a tiny scratch shaped suspiciously like a smiley face, which might be accidental or might be a 2,500-year-old prank. Archaeologists sometimes find playful etchings on pottery, proving that ancient people were capable of the same chaotic energy as modern teenagers. You round a corner and find the small courtyard open to the sky. Cool night air brushes your cheek, and for a moment you're surprised by how gentle it feels after the hearth. The boundary between indoors and outdoors in these homes wasn't a sharp line. It pulsed with light, breeze, and daily movement. You catch the scent of figs drying somewhere, mingling with a hint of goat from the small pen beyond the doorway. One of the goats stares at you with that deeply unimpressed goat expression that says, "I was here first." You give the goat a nod of respect. It gives you nothing in return. Classic goat. From this courtyard, you sense the home's rhythm. Early mornings, built around grinding grain, late afternoons thick with cooking aromas, evenings softening into shared meals by the fire. Historians still debate how much free time the average ancient household had, but the pattern here feels unhurried, not because life was easy, but because everything flowed from a single dependable point. When a space has a calm center, even chores start moving at a pace that doesn't rip your soul out through your sandals. You glance back toward the hearth, its orange reflection dancing on the polished pottery like a signal flare of comfort. You're struck by how much the architecture itself seems to revolve around the flame. Doorways aim toward it, walls curve just enough to cradle it. Even the airflow feels like it's negotiated, diplomatically, to avoid disturbing the goddess's favorite seat. It's the opposite of modern design trends, where the center of the home is whichever outlet can handle the TV's power strip. A quirky household custom drifts into your mind. In some regions, people would sweep the floor in slow, deliberate motions so the dust wouldn't swirl into the fire. Not because they were afraid of sparks, though that was a bonus, but because stirring up too much chaos near Hestia's space felt disrespectful. Imagine sweeping around your Wi-Fi router today with the same reverence. You'd look unhinged, but spiritually aligned. You walk deeper into the house and find the sleeping area, set off with low partitions. No doors, just fabric draped in a way that lets privacy exist without pretending it's absolute. The blankets are simple but thick, stuffed with wool and smelling faintly of the warmth they borrowed earlier. You brush your hand across one and feel the tiny grit of sand common in ancient coastal towns. It doesn't bother you. The softness underneath makes up for it, and there's something grounding about touching a bed that has never once heard the word mattress. There's a lull in the air as you imagine people settling down for the night. One figure finishing a bit of weaving, another checking on the coals, another whispering a good night to the goddess, whose flame ensures the house stays a home. Even the pets, usually a dog or cat, would curl near the hearth, acting like miniature backup firekeepers. Your modern pet might ignore you entirely, but ancient pets, they knew where the heat was. You notice something subtle in your own body. Your posture has softened, your breathing has slowed, and your shoulders have started to melt downward like wax on a quiet evening. This home wasn't designed to impress, it was designed to hold, to warm, to invite people into the habit of staying. You understand now why Hestia doesn't leave her post. She doesn't need to roam to make an impact. Her presence spreads through every corner of this house like a patient pulse. As you slip back toward the hearth, the flame flickers once, just enough to acknowledge you, and you understand that nothing in this home works without that tiny, steady glow. You ease back toward the hearth, tracing the warmth like a thread guiding you through half-lit hallways. The fire greets you with that familiar, even-tempered glow, never too bright, never too dramatic, as if it has signed a personal vow not to perform unnecessary theatrics. You settle near it again, and this time you begin to notice something deeper. The flame doesn't behave like an isolated bit of burning wood. It feels connected somehow to places far beyond this room. You get the sense that the warmth here hums in quiet sympathy with countless other hearths scattered across the Greek world, each one flickering in its own rhythm, yet somehow echoing the presence of Hestia. You wonder how a goddess could keep so many fires alive without ever getting up. A mainstream fact offers the first clue. Hestia was worshipped in every household, every city, every communal hall. Unlike the flashier Olympians who danced across myths like chaotic celebrities, she stayed rooted, so rooted that her worship practitioners treated her fire as a living extension of her. If another hearth needed blessing, they didn't wait for her to travel there. They took flame from her, literally transported it, ember by ember, across land or sea. It's like the ancient version of take a bit of this energy with you, except instead of inspirational quotes, they used burning sticks and determination. But the quirky tidbit is even better. Some communities believed Hestia could notice when a distant hearth lost its flame and quietly help rekindle it, not by sending a lightning bolt or dispatching a talking animal, but by making the next attempt at fire starting suspiciously easier. You can imagine a weary parent kneeling beside cold ashes, mumbling, "Come on, Hestia, I'm trying here." And then, whoosh, the tiniest spark catches, like someone gave it a friendly push. Historians still argue whether this belief came from ritual, weather patterns, or just good storytelling by people who really needed their soup warm before sundown. You tilt your head and imagine hundreds of modest homes, each lit by people whose goals weren't grand epics, but simple survival, baking bread, keeping babies warm, boiling water for laundry, soothing aches with poultices warmed by gentle heat. Hestia's flame wasn't about spectacle, it was about enabling everyday life. She's basically the ancient goddess of look. If the essentials aren't handled, nothing else works. A soft breeze slips through a small opening in the wall and nudges the flame, but it doesn't waver. Instead, it seems to lean into the draft, like someone adjusting a blanket. You chuckle under your breath. This fire has better emotional regulation than most Olympians. If Hera or Ars sat still this long, someone would probably check their pulse. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the pops of resin in the logs. Each little sound feels like punctuation in a slow, soothing language, and you begin to understand something. The hearth wasn't a decorative feature of ancient life, it was the primary tool for continuity. Families carried fire from old homes to new ones when relocating. City founders lit their communal flame using fire from their ancestral town. Weddings included symbolic touches to the hearth. Even disputes sometimes ended with shared offerings burned in one central blaze, as if saying, "All right, let's warm up and try again." Historians still debate the exact rituals surrounding these practices. Did people rehearse the same chants everywhere? Did they improvise? Did some families have their own quirky habits, like dropping a sprig of thyme in the flames because great grandma swore it made the gods kinder? No one knows for sure, but standing here in this gently pulsing radiance, you sense how personal these gestures must have been. The fire wasn't asking for perfection, it was asking for attention. You hold your hands near the glow again, and the warmth drifts across your skin like memory more than heat. It feels familiar, even though you've never stood here before. Maybe that's the trick of a goddess who never leaves her seat. She creates consistency so powerful that anyone who approaches feels like they've been here already, like the warmth knew them long before they knew her. You imagine fires burning in the homes of fishermen hauling nets at dawn, in the dim workshops of potters turning clay at midday, in the quiet alcoves of widows mending garments at dusk. All these flames, all these small worlds, find their root in the still center where you now sit. And none of them require Hestia to walk from house to house carrying a lighter like some mythic handyman. She radiates steadiness outward, and people carry their share of it wherever they go. A faint shifting catches your eye, a small crack in the log, sending up a spark that spirals lazily upward before fading. It's such a tiny moment, but it feels symbolic, like watching a quiet message rise and dissolve. You lean back and let the thought settle. Hestia's gift isn't movement, it's reach. Quiet, unwavering reach that doesn't need footsteps or miracles. You smirk to yourself as another light joke tiptoes in. If the modern world had a Hestia style system for energy distribution, your electricity bill would just read, "Continued because you believed in it." And honestly, most of us would take that deal. The flame shifts again, brighter for a breath, then softer. And you realize that this is how the goddess travels, without traveling. Every blaze that catches from her influence becomes a little embassy of warmth. By staying rooted, she becomes everywhere. You exhale slowly, letting the idea melt into your bones. Sometimes, the most powerful movement is choosing not to move at all. You sit with the hearth a little longer, letting its soft glow settle behind your eyes before you ease into the next space, the world outside this home, where Hestia's influence stretches into the very bones of the city. When you step out into the early morning air, it carries that faint mineral chill that makes you feel briefly awake before the warmth pulls you right back into a calmer rhythm. The streets curve gently toward a central square, and even though the day hasn't fully begun, you can already sense how the city breathes in time with its communal fire. A mainstream fact floats to the surface. Nearly every Greek city kept a sacred public hearth at its political heart, not tucked away in a temple, not hidden behind heavy doors, but placed right at the center where decisions were made. Travelers passed through, and offerings rose in thin spirals toward the sky. That public flame was the city's identity in fire form, a steady signal that the community was alive, functioning, and hopefully not arguing itself into oblivion. You follow the sound of sandals scuffing stone as workers start sweeping the square. Their movements are slow but practiced, clearing away dust in long arcs that spiral toward the city's hearth. They don't rush. This is the kind of chore you do on autopilot while thinking about breakfast or whether your goat will behave today. Spoiler, the goat will not behave. Goats didn't behave in 1200 BCE, and they don't behave now. Some traditions are immortal. The hearth in the center of the square doesn't blaze brightly. It's more of a sedate, thoughtful flame. People drift by, giving it the same respectful glance you'd give a sleeping cat you don't want to disturb. The warmth here doesn't try to dominate the space, it anchors it. You feel the same calming pulse as before, but now expanded into something civic, something shared. Historians still argue whether these communal fires burned nonstop or were ceremonially rekindled at intervals. But everyone agrees on one thing. When a new colony was founded, settlers carried flame from this central hearth to ignite the hearth of their new home. That wasn't just symbolism, it was continuity in ember form, an ancient version of we're still connected, even across the sea. Imagine explaining that on modern customs forms. Reason for transporting fire, emotional solidarity. A quirky little detail emerges as you watch someone place a tiny cake near the edge of the fire. Some city festivals involved offering simple foods, not grand feasts, but things like round cakes shaped vaguely like the sun, or bundles of herbs tied with string. People didn't try to outdo each other with elaborate sacrifices. Hestia didn't want drama, she wanted sincerity. If Zeus's ritual offerings were basically mythological fireworks, Hestia's were the quiet clink of a teacup in a silent room. You wander a bit farther into the agora, noticing how the warmth extends without pushing. Stalls are being set up, fish still glistening from the morning haul, figs stacked in careful pyramids, woven cloth folded in crisp squares. The fire's presence threads invisibly through all this activity. It sets the tone, calm transactions, unhurried conversations, minimal shouting unless someone's trying to haggle down the price of olives. And even then, they keep their voices casual, like they're arguing with a cousin they're too tired to hate. You move toward the administrative building, low, rectangular, sun-warmed stone, where city officials gather. A small flame from the central hearth burns inside as well, reinforcing unity between public and private spaces. If you imagine modern government buildings adopting this tradition, you can almost picture a city hall with a glowing fireplace and a sign that says, "No political shouting beyond this point. The goddess is napping." Honestly, it might solve several problems. From your vantage point, you watch a group of travelers enter the square. They pause at the hearth, each placing a hand briefly near the flame. They're not worshiping, they're orienting themselves. It's the ancient equivalent of checking your GPS, but instead of satellites, you use serenity. The warmth acts like a soft welcome message. You're safe here, you're on shared ground. Try not to antagonize anyone before breakfast. The fire brightens us slightly as a light breeze brushes through the square, and you find yourself mesmerized by how it holds its own in the open air. No frantic flicker, no fight against the wind, just a deliberate sway, like someone nodding thoughtfully at a storyteller. You get the sense Hestia herself would rather offer a warm drink than smite anyone. It's a refreshing contrast to certain other gods who treat conflict like a full time hobby. Historians still debate how much influence Hestia truly had over city politics. Some argue that her presence influenced decisions indirectly by promoting stability and reflection. Others believe her symbolism mattered more than any actual spiritual intervention. But standing here, you feel how the warmth reinforces the city's rhythm. People behave differently around calm fire. They speak softer, they think longer, they pick their words like they're choosing herbs for a stew, carefully, thoughtfully, sometimes with a little too much oregano. You sit on a stone ledge and let the city move around you. The flicker of the hearth it catches in polished bronze shields carried by the guards. Children dart past, giggling, their shadows stretching and collapsing in the morning light. A vendor calls out the day's prices with a voice like gravel soaked in honey. Everything radiates outward from that single steady flame, a center of gravity forged from heat instead of stone. And as you watch the city organize itself around warmth, you begin to understand Hestia's most understated gift. She doesn't just tend fires, she tends culture. Each steady ember becomes a gentle suggestion. Stay grounded, stay patient, stay part of something larger than yourself. Fire keeps the city alive, but Hestia keeps it civil. You breathe in the mingled scents of smoke, sea salt, and herbs drifting from the market, and you realize the city isn't just built around a hearth. It's built around the idea of home, stretched outward until an entire population can share it. You drift back toward the scent of simmering air, letting the city fade behind you as the hearth draws you into another part of daily life, the kitchen, if you can call it that. It isn't a tidy room with labeled spice jars or countertops so clean they shine like mirrors. It's a humble cooking space tucked close enough to the hearth that the warmth slides across your shins the moment you step inside. And you realize something almost immediately. This is where Hestia's quiet work becomes practical. Not dramatic, not mythic, practical, the way warm bread and bubbling stews have saved more souls than any thunderbolt ever could. A clay pot hangs just above the fire, suspended by a simple hook. It doesn't boil furiously. It murmurs, as if it's whispering reassurances to anyone within earshot. You lean closer, and a ribbon of steam escapes with the faint aroma of onions or herbs and barley. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. The majority of ancient Greek meals were simple: grains, legumes, vegetables, and occasionally small bits of fish or meat. Olive oil was the crown jewel that made even modest dishes feel like something worth coming home to. And all of it depended on the embers that Hestia steadied day after day, providing consistent heat long before anyone invented a temperature knob. You watch as someone, maybe the household's matron, maybe an older child trusted with today's cooking, tilts a ladle gently toward the pot. No rush, no frantic stirring, just a slow evaluation of whether the broth tastes like it needs another pinch of thyme. You can almost hear the internal monologue. If it tastes bland, we blame the herb. If it tastes too strong, we blame the volcano god for growing thyme with attitude. That's how cooking works here. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some ancient households placed small offerings of leftover dough or the first splash of wine near the hearth before beginning a meal, not as a sacrifice, more like leaving a tiny thank you snack for the goddess running the heat source. It's the mythological equivalent of thanking your rice cooker before pressing start. And honestly, it feels polite. Historians still argue whether these offerings followed strict ritual rules or if families improvised their gestures based on local tradition. Some believe the offerings were carefully timed and scripted. Others think people just tossed in whatever smelled nice. But as you watch the cook lift the pot slightly away from the flame, using nothing more than a folded cloth and pure confidence, you sense the truth is somewhere in between. Ritual matters, but so does instinct. And in this kitchen, Hestia nurtures both. You notice the small tools around you: a mortar and pestle stained from crushed herbs, a wooden spoon worn down into a smooth crescent from years of stirring, a board with faint lines etched by a knife that has probably seen more vegetables than a farmer's market. The entire kitchen operates on slow cycles: prep, simmer, taste, adjust, wait, serve. And each step relies on Hestia's gift of steady fire. Imagine trying to run this household with a hearth that sputtered constantly. People would starve. Bread dough would sulk instead of rising. Stews would refuse to thicken. The entire Greek timeline would collapse before heroes even left home. It's no wonder ancient writers treated Hestia as the quiet foundation of civilization. Without her, Achilles would have had to pause mid-war just to fix a burnt pot. You sit down on a low stool, marveling at how even the shadows seem to cook slowly here. The flame casts gentle shapes on the walls: circles, waves, tiny flickers like dancing fish. And as the cook ladles a spoonful of broth for tasting, the warmth brushes your cheek like a patient reassurance. Don't worry, everything is happening exactly as it should, slowly, carefully, deliciously. A small child wanders in, carrying a basket of vegetables and wearing the expression of someone who has just discovered that carrots exist in more shapes than expected. They drop a turnip. It rolls directly toward the hearth, stops at the edge of the stone barrier, and settles there as if deciding whether to join the stew. You can't help but smile. Even the vegetables are considering sacrificial careers today. You watch as the cook works, and you begin to appreciate the choreography of a meal built around calm fire. There are no timers, no sizzling oil threatening to leap out and scar someone's eyebrows. Just anticipation, a quiet trust in the flame's consistency. If the pot simmers too quickly, the cook moves it a little farther from the center. If it's too slow, they nudge it closer. It's an ancient dance. You don't command the fire, you negotiate with it. Historians still debate whether Greek households kept multiple cooking stations or relied primarily on one central hearth. But the simplicity here feels right. One flame for warmth, light, meals, and ritual. One flame to gather around. One flame to soothe. You feel it in your bones. Hestia isn't the goddess of chaos or passion or war. She's the goddess of this, the bubbling, slow-cooked reality of living. You watch the meal come together, and for a moment you swear the fire brightens in approval, or maybe that's just your eyes adjusting. Hard to tell with sacred flames. They're subtle like that. The pot is finally moved off the hook, set aside to rest, its aroma warming the air like a soft embrace. The family will gather soon, bowls in hand, grateful for the food and the flame that made it possible. And you feel it too, the comfort of knowing that warmth, nourishment, and rhythm flow from the same quiet source, not through thunder, not through spectacle, through embers.
You linger near the cooking space for a moment, letting the aroma of barley and herbs settle into your clothing, like a souvenir you didn't ask for, but absolutely welcome. When you step away, the heat follows you in a softened trail. It guides you toward the threshold, the literal doorway of the home, where Hestia's influence stretches into the space between inside and out there. This threshold isn't grand. It's a simple wooden frame, slightly warped from years of weather and footsteps. But here, in this unassuming spot, so many daily rituals unfold that you start to understand why ancient Greeks treated doorways almost like emotional checkpoints. They're not just practical openings. They're moments where the world shifts from private to public, from safety to unpredictability, from simmering soup to gossip and goats. And each shift, no matter how small, carried Hestia's quiet oversight. A mainstream fact surfaces as you take one slow step across the line. Guests entering a Greek home were often greeted with a brief moment of stillness at the hearth. Before you were offered food, before small talk began, you were symbolically acknowledged by the flame. Hospitality wasn't just a custom, it was a sacred responsibility. The goddess of the hearth stood guard over that obligation, making sure homes treated visitors with decency rather than suspicious side-eye. You picture yourself as a guest in this home, lifting a hand in a small greeting. The moment feels familiar, even though it belongs to a world that predates doormats and awkward, "should I take my shoes off?" conversations. The flame glows a little brighter, as if nodding at you in welcome. Household members move around you with relaxed steps, confident that this greeting ritual sets the tone for everything that comes after. Warmth first, conversation second, potential mischief somewhere down the line. A quirky tidbit emerges from the quiet. Some families placed handmade charms or painted symbols on their doorposts to invite good fortune and discourage bad moods. Not demons, not monsters, just bad vibes. Imagine painting a little swirl above your doorway today and declaring, "This keeps crankiness out." Honestly, worth a try. Historians still argue whether these door charms had standardized meanings or if every region invented its own homegrown versions. Some say the symbols were tied to agricultural blessings. Others insist they represented household ancestors. And a few scholars maintain that we're overthinking it, and ancient people were simply decorating because humans have always decorated everything. Standing here, you suspect all three possibilities are true, and that the goddess didn't mind as long as the hearth stayed respected. You step fully into the doorway now, feeling the gentle gradient of temperature on your skin. Behind you, the hearth hums with steady warmth. Ahead of you, the courtyard opens into cool evening air. This in-between space is where arrivals and departures take place, and it feels charged with a soft tension, not stressful, but meaningful. Someone approaches the doorway from the outside, carrying a bundle of reeds. As they step forward, their pace slows not because of physical effort, but because crossing this threshold is a moment of transition. Their eyes flick briefly toward the hearth, acknowledging the flame's presence the way someone today might nod at a family elder sitting by the window. No words needed, just recognition. And then there's the opposite ritual, leaving. You imagine someone gathering their sandals, adjusting their cloak, giving one last glance toward the hearth before stepping out into the busy world. Not a dramatic farewell, no speeches, no longing stares, but a small internal realignment. They leave knowing warmth will be here when they return. You can almost hear Hestia clearing her metaphorical throat like a gentle supervisor, reminding them not to forget their lunch. 3 kids rush past you in a blur, playing some version of tag that seems to involve exaggerated lunges and the occasional goat-related sound effect. One skids dangerously close to the threshold, pauses, remembers the household rule about not barreling through the doorway like a deranged satyr, and continues at a slower trot. The small respect paid to this boundary is less about superstition and more about rhythm. Entering and exiting are deliberate acts, meant to be acknowledged, not rushed. Historians still debate the exact sequence of greeting rituals. Did host touch the guest's shoulder first, or did the guest touch the hearth first? Did they offer water, wine, or both? But as you watch a newcomer set down a small gift near the doorway, a handful of dried flowers, you sense the core truth. The gesture mattered more than the script. The moment of pause. The invitation to share warmth, the acknowledgement that stepping into someone's home is stepping into their story. A soft joke bubbles up in your mind. If modern households followed this level of thoughtful ritual, every guest would end up standing silently at the doorway, waiting for the Wi-Fi password to be ceremonially bestowed upon them. Honestly, might improve parties. You lean against the doorway frame, feeling the grain of the wood under your palm. The threshold becomes a metaphor whether you want it to or not, this gentle crossing point between inner life and outer world. Hestia hovers here too. Not physically, but in the way the air shifts. Her warmth doesn't chase you if you leave, but it remembers you when you return. And that's the real magic. No lightning, no feathers transforming into messages, no dramatic transformations, just continuity. A place that doesn't forget you. As you finally step back inside, the hearth light brushes your face again, soft and familiar. You feel it welcome you, without needing to say anything at all. You leave the threshold behind and drift back into the soft interior of the home, noticing how the pace of everything slows again once you're fully inside. The hearth's glow spreads gently across the walls, and you begin to notice the quieter rhythms of household life. The tasks repeated daily, the chores done so routinely, they almost become a kind of meditation. And woven through all of it is the subtle influence of Hestia, guiding without demanding, shaping without intruding. You step into a space where wool baskets sit neatly stacked, spindles rest on low stools, and an unfinished piece of cloth hangs from a loom with the same patience as someone waiting for their partner to finish telling a long story. The work here belongs mostly to the women of the household, though children and elders slip in and out of the chores as needed. A mainstream fact flickers into place. In many ancient Greek homes, women carried the primary responsibility for maintaining the hearth, preparing meals, weaving cloth, and managing the overall flow of domestic life. Their daily labor wasn't just routine, it was the backbone of the household economy. You notice one woman sitting near the fire, fingers moving with steady precision as she spins wool. The spindle twirls like a tiny dancer, and each movement falls into harmony with the flicker of the embers. She doesn't look rushed. She doesn't look bored. She simply works in a rhythm that feels older than the house itself. The fire casts a warm glow across her hair and shoulders, and you see what ancient poets meant when they described Hestia as the invisible companion of diligent hands. Then the quirky detail arrives, slipping into your awareness like a cat curling onto your lap. Some households kept small, hearth guardians, not full-on idols or statues, but humble clay figures shaped to resemble family members or ancestors. They weren't objects of worship, but reminders of continuity. You imagine a small clay grandmother watching over the chores with the exact expression your real grandmother used when you didn't fold your blanket correctly. Historians still argue whether these figures had ritual significance or were simply sentimental keepsakes, but either way, their presence feels comforting. You bend slightly to look closer at one of the baskets. Inside, bundles of yarn are dyed in soft natural colors: saffron yellows, muted reds from madder root, earthy browns pulled from walnut husks. A soft breeze shifts through the room, and the scent is faint but comforting. Wool, sun, and the faintest hint of olive oil rubbed into hands to keep them from drying during long hours of work. The fire hums quietly in the background, not commanding attention but offering calm companionship. You watch as another member of the household enters, a young girl carrying a stack of folded cloths that seem one gust away from tumbling to the floor. She navigates the room with exaggerated caution, the kind that suggests she has already dropped things today and doesn't want a repeat. Observing her, you can't help but smile. Not all ancient life was serene. Sometimes it was a balancing act involving laundry and self-respect. The woman spinning wool gives the girl a warm look, not the sharp reprimand of someone obsessed with perfection, but the gentle acknowledgement of shared effort. You can almost hear the unspoken thought. We've all dropped the cloth at some point. Just try again. Historians still debate how much personal downtime women had during the day. Some argue their work schedules were relentless. Others believe tasks were punctuated by frequent pauses for conversation, laughter, or brief rests near the hearth. Watching the women here, you sense a balance, moments of quiet productivity, moments of stillness, and moments of muted humor when someone accidentally tangles the yarn and blames it on a mischievous household spirit. You settle on a small bench, letting the warmth seep through the woven seat. The fire brightens slightly, reflecting in the polished bronze of a kettle resting nearby. And you notice something subtle in the way the household members move. They calibrate their speed to the flame's steadiness. No frantic rushing, no raised voices. Even when a child drops a heavy jar and everyone jumps a little, the panic diffuses quickly, absorbed by the room's rhythm. A soft joke slips out of your thoughts. If Hestia ever offered a modern masterclass, it would probably be called The Art of Doing Everything Slowly Enough. Not to scream. And honestly, you'd sign up. You shift your focus to a woman who kneels by the hearth, adjusting the logs with slow, practiced motions. Her face reflects the flame in bronze-gold highlights, giving her an appearance that's both ordinary and quietly divine. As she works, you realize why households loved Hestia. Her presence gave dignity to daily labor. Even the simplest tasks, mending a cloak, kneading dough, rinsing olive leaves, felt meaningful when done within the circle of her warmth. And maybe that's the point. Not every goddess needed storms or epics. Some shaped the world from the inside out, turning domestic life into a sacred rhythm that stitched families and generations together. Tasks repeated daily weren't burdens. They were offerings, gentle ones, humble ones, but offerings all the same. You watch a final moment before standing. Two women leaning toward each other, murmuring about tomorrow's baking or the upcoming festival. They don't look tired. They look rooted, grounded, as if Hestia's warmth is the soil they grow from. When you return to the hearth again, you realize something surprising. The flame hasn't changed at all, yet everything around it has shaped itself into harmony. That's Hestia's influence. Quiet, unseen, omnipresent. You exhale slowly, feeling your own shoulders soften under the spell of calm work and quiet warmth. The tasks continue, steady as breath, and you feel yourself becoming part of the rhythm too. You let the hush of household work fade behind you and follow the gentle pull of cooler air drifting toward the outer gate. The flicker of Hestia's fire grows softer with each step, but you never feel it disappear. Instead, it lingers behind you like a memory of warmth pressed into your bones. When you step beyond the home and onto the dusty road stretching toward the horizon, you sense another side of her presence, the way her steadiness travels with those who must leave the comfort of their hearths behind. You join a small caravan of travelers moving slowly down the path, their sandals tapping out a rhythm that could lull anyone into drowsy contemplation. Some carry tools, some baskets, some bundles wrapped in cloth. One man has strapped so many pots onto his back that he clinks with every step like an ambulatory kitchen. He doesn't appear bothered. Maybe he's used to sounding like cookware. Maybe he enjoys the attention. Hard to say. A mainstream historical fact hums at the edge of your mind. Travelers in ancient Greece relied heavily on roadside shrines, small sanctuaries, and public hearths maintained by communities or local caretakers. These spots offered rest, warmth, and a place to give thanks before continuing the journey. In a world with no hotels, no drive-thrus, and definitely no vending machines, a quiet hearth by the road wasn't just comforting, it was survival. You approach one of those shrines now, a simple stone structure with a recess holding a modest fire. Nothing grand, nothing meant to impress, just a flame tended by someone who understands that warmth is as essential as bread. A woman sits nearby, her hair wrapped in a faded cloth, stirring a pot with the slow, circular patience of someone who has long since stopped rushing anything. A thin trail of smoke rises upward, carrying the faint scent of lentils and thyme. The quirky detail arrives right on cue. Some roadside hearths were known not for their location, but for the personality of their caretaker. Travelers would remember a shrine because the woman there told great stories, or the man kept a cat who judged everyone, or the fire always tasted faintly of rosemary. You watch a small cat slink out from behind the present shrine now, tail high, eyes narrowed, the embodiment of judgment in feline form. The travelers give it a respectful berth. Cats have always ruled travel stops with an iron paw. Historians still argue whether these rest points were formally associated with Hestia or simply adopted her symbolism because a hearth without her blessing felt incomplete. Standing here, though, you can feel the connection. The warmth mirrors the same quiet steadiness you experienced inside the home, as if Hestia extended a small portion of her attention to anyone wandering far from their own fire. A weary merchant lowers himself onto a stone bench with a sigh so dramatic it could earn applause. He rubs his calves and mutters something about the road being longer this year, though you strongly suspect the road has not changed. His patience has. Another traveler approaches the shrine, placing a few grains into the fire with a soft murmur, not a prayer. Exactly more like a whispered greeting to a goddess who specializes in the kind of support that doesn't draw attention to itself. You set your own hand near the flame, feeling its warmth catch your skin with a familiarity that surprises you. Somehow, even here, miles from the home you just left, the heat feels recognizable. It's the kind of warmth that says, you're not lost, you're just somewhere else for a while. A soft joke nudges your thoughts. If airports today had tiny hearths where people could rest, half of humanity might actually show up to flights in a good mood. Imagine a departure lounge with firelight instead of bright overhead glare. Hestia would definitely approve. You follow the travelers as they resume their journey, the rhythm of their steps melding with the hum of cicadas hidden among the shrubs. The landscape stretches outward, rolling hills, olive groves shimmering in the sunlight. Dusty paths weaving between them like pale threads stitching villages together. You feel the absence of the home hearth more sharply out here, but it's not uncomfortable. It's simply a reminder that warmth is something you carry within you after staying near the flame long enough. The road winds past a small hamlet where children chase each other along a low wall, waving at the passing travelers with the unrestrained confidence of people who have not yet discovered self-consciousness. Even here, you sense a subtle glow from the house's dim, domestic fires that lend the settlement a soft heartbeat. Travelers pause, some exchanging greetings, some asking for water, others sharing news about the next city. The air fills with voices layered over the steady drone of insects and distant shepherd calls. Historians still debate how often travelers joined local meals or slept inside strangers' homes versus resting at communal spaces. But as you watch one family wave a traveler inside without hesitation, you realize hospitality wasn't just practiced, it was expected. A hearth without shared warmth was considered incomplete. One of the travelers, an older man with a staff polished, smooth by time pauses, and turns to you as if sensing your presence. He smiles, tired, but sincere. "Fire stays with you," he says, tapping his chest lightly. "You just have to remember where it came from." Then he continues walking without waiting for a response, like someone dropping a wisdom bomb and strolling off before the awkward silence arrives. You let that settle inside you as the road bends toward the horizon. The heat of the sun grows stronger, but the memory of Hestia's warmth remains its own kind of compass, glowing under your ribs. The travelers move on, carrying the essence of the hearth in quiet ways through shared meals, exchange stories, small offerings, and simple gestures of rest. And you move with them, realizing that even far from home, Hestia's presence flickers in every place where people pause, breathe, and warm their hands. You follow the road a little longer, letting the footsteps of the travelers fade into a gentle memory behind you. Then, almost as naturally as breathing, you find yourself drifting toward a different kind of warmth, not the steady glow of daily chores or roadside hearths, but the slow-building radiance of a festival. It begins with sound. The soft thump of distant drums, carried on a breeze that smells faintly of fresh bread and crushed herbs. You feel the air shift, alive in a way that only happens when a community prepares to celebrate something ancient, quiet, and deeply rooted. People are gathering near the city's central hearth again. But today, the space feels transformed. The usual hum of the agora has softened into a kind of ceremonial hush, punctuated by bursts of laughter from children chasing each other around baskets filled with flowers. The hearth itself burns brighter, not dramatically, not like Zeus decided to spice things up, but with the kind of attentive glow a host might adopt when welcoming honored guests. A mainstream fact drifts to you. Festivals for Hestia weren't loud spectacles. No chariot races, no elaborate dramas, no musicians sprinting across a stage. Instead, her celebrations focused on simple offerings, shared meals, and rituals that honored stability and gratitude. The goddess of the hearth didn't need fireworks, she needed sincerity. And in a world that adored theatrical gods, the idea of a quiet festival feels almost rebellious. You watch as families bring forward baskets of bread shaped into small rings, each decorated with herbs or seeds. Someone places a clay pot of honeyed wine near the hearth, another sets down a garland woven from laurel leaves and thyme. The offerings aren't lavish, they're tender. You can almost hear the collective thought behind them. Thank you for keeping us warm. Thank you for keeping us steady. Then comes the quirky detail, wrapped in the faint scent of incense. Some regions practiced a tradition where the first flame of the festival was carried from home to home, allowing each household's hearth to greet the communal fire. It's like the ancient world's version of visiting relatives during the holidays, less about obligation, more about connection. You watch someone light a small torch from the main hearth, carrying it with deliberate steps as if balancing the most important candle of all time. And honestly, given the context, they sort of are. Historians still argue whether this torchlighting tradition symbolized unity, rebirth, or simply the convenience of starting all the cooking fires at once. But as you see faces soften in the glow, you suspect the meaning was layered. It wasn't just about fire, it was about belonging. You sit on a low stone bench as the festival settles into its rhythm. Musicians begin playing soft melodies on flutes and lyres, their notes drifting upward like gentle spirals of smoke. No one dances frantically. Instead, people sway with the tempo, letting the music do the heavy lifting. A child taps a drum, wildly offbeat, but enthusiastically. The adults grin as though this is the highlight of the entire ritual, which, honestly, it kind of is. Vendors pass around sweet cakes, dusted with herbs, their texture slightly crunchy on the outside and impossibly soft inside. When you taste one, the flavor surprises you, simple, rustic, comforting. It echoes the same warm steadiness you've felt in every part of this journey. A soft joke forms in your mind. If this festival existed today, people would attend for the vibes and stay because someone's grandmother insisted you take 3 more pieces of bread before leaving. You let your gaze drift across the square, watching as people place small bowls of grain near the fire. At one point, a young man tries to impress someone by tossing his offering from a distance. It lands dramatically close to the embers, causing everyone nearby to inhale sharply. The flame flickers, then steadies, as if Hestia herself rolled her eyes and decided she had bigger concerns than faintly reckless flirting. You're relieved the fire has better boundaries than the young man does. Historians still debate whether Hestia's festivals marked seasonal transitions, civic milestones, or household blessings. But sitting here, wrapped in music, warmth, and the scent of baked goods, you get the feeling the festival exists to remind people of something simpler, that life moves more gently when everyone honors the same quiet center. As the afternoon deepens, shadows lengthen across the square, and the fire shifts into a deeper hue, rich reds, slow golds, the colors of a hearth preparing itself for evening stories. People begin to sit in loose circles, passing bowls of food, sharing tales of travel, harvests, and everyday misadventures. A woman tells a story about how her goat escaped during last year's festival and climbed onto the roof. Half the crowd laughs in sympathy. Goats remain undefeated. You lean back, letting the fire's glow reflect in your eyes. The festival isn't about spectacle. It's about stillness shared among many. About warmth that expands outward without losing its gentleness. About the kind of celebration that helps you breathe slower, sit longer, and remember, you're part of something steady. And as the fire burns soft, bright, unhurried, you realize that Hestia's greatest festival gift is this. She turns community into comfort. Not through thunder, not through miracles, but through warmth that wraps everyone in the same slow, steady glow. You let the final notes of festival music drift off into the quiet evening, and soon the city returns to its usual rhythm, still warm, still steady, still centered around the flame that holds everything together. But tonight, you wander toward the edge of the agora, curious about what happens when that steadiness falters. Not in a dramatic, world-ending way. Hestia isn't the type to let her hearth explode like some divine popcorn maker, but in the subtle ways a city shows strain when its internal warmth flickers instead of glows. You sit on a low stone wall and watch the communal hearth from a distance. The flame burns as always, calm, focused, predictable. But the people around it? They shift, shuffle, and press against uncertainty, the way a pot lid rattles when steam builds inside. A merchant argues about taxes. A potter complains about dwindling clay supplies. Two elders debate whether the city council is taking too long to fix the western well. None of the conflicts are catastrophic. They're the small fractures that appear when life grows heavy in quiet ways. A mainstream historical fact comes forward. Ancient Greek cities believed the public hearth symbolized civic stability. When the flame burned steadily, the city felt grounded. When it wavered, or worse, went out, people saw it as a sign of imbalance or misfortune. You can imagine how unsettling it would be to wake one morning and find the fire cold, like discovering your heart skipped a beat while you weren't looking. Yet here, the flame is steady. It's the people who are wobbling. You wander closer, moving through clusters of conversation. A group of women gather near a well, speaking softly about the harvest. Their voices hold that subtle sharpness of anxiety, not fear, but fatigue. One presses a hand to her brow, whispering something about how the figs ripened too quickly this year. Another sighs, saying she hasn't slept well. You can feel the collective exhale of a community stretched thin by small frustrations that pile up like pebbles in a sandal. That's when the quirky bit of cultural lore lands in your mind. In times of strain, some cities performed a ritual where officials walked in a slow circle around the public hearth, carrying bowls of barley and water. The idea wasn't to fix anything magically, it was to remind everyone that the city still had a center, and as long as that center held, everything else could be sorted out with patience and warm bread. Humans everywhere need rituals like that, quiet processes for recentering, performed not because they solve problems, but because they soothe the people who must solve them. Historians still argue whether these rituals had official religious status or if they were more like cultural comfort blankets, symbolic gestures that communities used to reassure themselves during tense seasons. But as you watch the small gatherings around the hearth, you realize the distinction doesn't matter. Humans always need a moment to say, collectively, let's not. You take a seat near the fire, feeling its warmth settle into your palms. The flame brightens slightly as a breeze brushes over it, and for a moment, you sense a shift in the crowd. People stop fidgeting, conversations soften. Even the merchant who was loudly predicting doom a moment ago now stands a bit straighter, as if remembering that panic rarely makes numbers add up. The fire feels like a teacher without words. Steady yourself first, then steady the world. A soft joke drifts into your thoughts. If modern cities used hearths as emotional barometers, you'd probably see entire crowds staring at the fire before election season, whispering, "Please stay lit," so we don't lose our minds. You close your eyes for a moment, just breathing, letting the rhythm settle. And as you do, you feel the subtle parallel between the city and the hearth. The flame doesn't burn fiercely. It burns consistently. It doesn't demand attention or roar with ego. It simply exists long enough and steadily enough that people naturally orient themselves around it. But what about when things improve? When the city thrives? You open your eyes to see a different scene taking shape. A farmer arrives with a cart full of grain. A fisherman hauls in baskets of fish, shining silver in the firelight. A group of potters unload fresh wares decorated with swirling patterns. The worries don't vanish. This isn't a magical flame, but you can feel a gentle recalibration. Stability returns not with a dramatic miracle, but as a slow tide of small successes. The city doesn't transform overnight. It shifts gradually, like embers rearranging themselves into a stronger glow. A child runs by carrying a wreath of flowers, laughing loudly enough to break the tension in the air. A few adults smile despite themselves. Even the elders arguing earlier now sit together, sharing dried figs in that unspoken truce snack tradition people have been practicing since the dawn of time. Historians still debate how much civic well-being people attributed directly to Hestia. Some say she was merely symbolic. Others suggest her presence created psychological stability in an unpredictable world. But sitting here, palms warm, heartbeat steady, you understand what ancient people must have felt. A calm center holds more power than 100 loud speeches. You watch the flame dance not wildly, not dramatically, but with confidence. You feel the warmth expand into your chest, smoothing out your own thoughts. And you realize something important. A thriving city isn't one that never stumbles. It's one that always knows where to return when it does. And Hestia's hearth is that return point. The quiet reminder that even when the world wavers, warmth remains. You stay by the city hearth a while longer, letting its rhythm settle into you like a gently repeated mantra. Eventually, though, your attention drifts toward the quieter corners of the square spaces, where stories linger in the air like cooling embers. And tonight, those stories seem especially drawn to one question that has followed Hestia for centuries. Why did she stay home? Not in a limiting way. Not in a she wasn't allowed way, but in a gentle, intentional way. As if she chose stillness the way others chose adventure. The myths surrounding that choice don't shout. They murmur. They don't ask you to marvel. They ask you to understand. You walk toward a shaded portico where a few elders sit, recounting tales in soft, practiced tones. They aren't performing. They're simply remembering. One gestures toward the hearth as he speaks, and the flames cast shifting patterns across his face like a second narrator. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. In the mythic tradition, Hestia is often described as the firstborn of the Olympians, and also the last to be reborn after the whole tangent swallowing incident. It's a confusing sequence, but one detail remains constant. She was the eldest, the one who knew chaos before order, the one who watched her siblings take their places in a world that needed lightning, oceans, marriage, hunting, music, and mischief. And what did she choose? The hearth, the one thing everyone depends on but rarely glorifies. The quirky detail that follows always feels slightly comedic. Two gods, Poseidon and Apollo, depending on the version once sought Hestia's hand. Both powerful, both impressive, both used to hearing yes from most people they pursued. And Hestia? She politely declined them both. She vowed to remain unmarried, undistracted, and unbothered, dedicating herself entirely to the hearth's stability. Honestly, it's one of the most legendary, no thanks, I'm good moments in mythology. You can't help but imagine the two gods standing there, slightly offended, as Hestia slides back to her hearth like someone returning to a cozy couch after turning down the chance to attend an extremely chaotic party. It's a divine mood. Historians still argue whether this mythic vow reflects early cultural values or later philosophical interpretations. Some say Hestia represented the ideal of household stability. Others insist she symbolized inner calm in a world that kept spilling its drink. Yet others think her myths simply emphasize that not every god needed flashy adventures. Some specialized in making sure life didn't fall apart between the dramatic moments. As you listen to the elders' trade versions of the story, you notice a pattern. Every interpretation highlights choice. Not confinement, not passivity. Choice. A goddess who could have wandered the world, stirred oceans, or guided kings, but instead said, "Actually, I'd rather tend the one fire everyone returns to when they're tired." You step away from the storytellers and wander to the edge of the square, where the evening sky grows dusky and the stars begin stitching themselves into the heavens. You think about what it means to choose stillness in a world that rewards spectacle. Even in mythology, stillness is rare. The Olympians caused natural disasters on days when they were bored. Some turned mortals into animals as a casual afternoon hobby. Yet, here is Hestia, choosing not to participate in that grand chaos and somehow becoming the most essential goddess of all. A soft joke sidles into your thoughts. If Hestia had social media, her entire feed would be warm lamp photos, bread recipes, and a single pinned post that says, "Please don't tag me in drama." And her follower count would still be massive because humans love the idea of peace even when they don't practice it. You walk again, following the curve of the square, until you reach a column carved with faint imagery. Small flames, a circular hearth, and what might be a stylized figure tending it. The edges are worn, smoothed by time and countless hands brushing past. Someone once traced a finger over this, maybe whispering a prayer for safety, maybe asking for a quiet night, maybe thanking the goddess for helping their bread rise properly. Big things and small things, Hestia receives both. Historians still debate how central she truly was in worship compared to the more dramatic Olympians. But every archaeological layer tells the same subtle truth. People lived their lives beside fire. They cooked, they ate, they warmed themselves, they shared stories, they survived winter, they welcomed guests all around a flame. And wherever the hearth existed, Hestia existed, too. You sit near the hearth again, feeling its glow curl around you like a familiar hand on your shoulder. And the myths feel different now, less like stories, more like small truths wrapped in gentle exaggeration. Hestia didn't need to roam the world to influence it. She just needed to be steady enough that everyone else had a place to return. And that is a kind of power unmatched by storms or spears or songs. The fire brightens, as though agreeing, and you breathe in the scent of warm ash and faint herbs. In that quiet, you understand why the ancients loved her. She asked for nothing extravagant. Just presence. Just respect. Just the acknowledgement that life begins and returns to the fire. She didn't keep the hearth warm because she had to. She kept it warm because someone needed to. You drift away from the agora, letting the soft twilight fold around you like a loose cloak. The hearth's glow stays visible in the corner of your vision until the winding streets finally pull you out of sight. But even then, the warmth lingers not just from Hestia's flame, but from the recognition that her role echoes far beyond Greece. You walk toward a quieter path, skirting the edge of the city. And as the evening deepens, you begin to sense other cultures gently brushing against your thoughts. Like travelers passing with lanterns held close. You settle beneath an olive tree, its branches whispering in the breeze. And imagine the world beyond these hills. What did warmth look like elsewhere? Who tended the fires that fed communities oceans away? The hearth, after all, wasn't solely a Greek concept, it was a human one. People everywhere built their survival around fire, shaping entire belief systems around the delicate balance between flame and shelter. A mainstream historical fact arrives first. In ancient Rome, the Vestal Virgins tended a sacred flame dedicated to Vesta, Hestia's counterpart. Their duty was lifelong, disciplined, and deeply honored. A single lapse, allowing the flame to extinguish, was seen as a bad omen for the entire state. You imagine the Vestals working with meticulous calm, their white veils catching the light as they walked past the glowing heart of the city. Different culture, different rituals, but the principle remained the same. A flame that burned for everyone. But the world spreads wider than Rome. A quirky cross-cultural detail slips in like a spark carried by wind. Among certain Slavic traditions, families believed a fire spirit, sometimes protective, sometimes mischievous, lived within the hearth. One story describes a spirit who hated sudden, loud noises and would retaliate by making pots mysteriously shatter. You can't help laughing softly. Even mythical beings get irritated by clumsy kitchen behavior. Historians still argue whether these hearth spirits were remnants of older animistic beliefs or later adaptations to household religion. But as you picture them, small, flickering presences with strong opinions about cookware, you realize the idea resonates with Hestia's aura as well. Warmth as personality, flame as companionship. You breathe slowly and let your attention stretch toward the east. You picture early Vedic households, where the sacred fire Agni played a central role in rituals. Agni wasn't just a god but a messenger carrying offerings from humans to the divine. The fire wasn't merely warmth, it was a bridge. And suddenly, the universality of it all hits you. Every culture wrapped its hopes, prayers, meals, and survival around flame. Fire made life possible, and gods, or spirits, were simply humanity's way of expressing gratitude for it. A soft joke slips into place. If every fire deity from every culture met for a global conference, half the conversation would be about managing smoke control, and the other half would be sharing bread recipes. Hestia, of course, would sit at the center table, politely sipping honeyed tea while everyone else debated who invented fire safety guidelines. You shift your weight, feeling the cool soil beneath you. The night insects begin their slow chorus, rising and falling like distant waves. You picture communities in sub-Saharan Africa, where hearth circles served as spaces for storytelling. People gathered around flickering flames not because they needed divine intervention, but because firelight made stories bloom. The hearth wasn't just about necessity, it was about connection, knowledge, identity. Historians still debate how similar these hearth-based traditions were across cultures, whether parallel evolution or diffusion shaped them. But the effect feels too universal to dismiss. Fire made families linger. Fire shaped memory. Fire encouraged conversation when the rest of the world fell dark. You picture Polynesian voyaging communities as well, carrying embers aboard canoes so the next island's cooking fire could be lit quickly. Embers wrapped in bark or leaves became tiny travelers themselves, carried across the ocean like seeds of warmth. You imagine one of those embers, glowing faintly in the dark hull of a canoe, stubbornly refusing to go out. A small heartbeat of home on the open sea. You tilt your head back and look at the sky. Stars press softly against the horizon, their own kind of distant fire. All these cultures, Greek, Roman, Slavic, Vedic, African, Polynesian, they looked upward and downward, finding warmth in both directions. Some fires were gods, some were friends, some were tools, and some were all three at once. What unites them isn't the mythology, but the feeling. Warmth is life. Warmth is continuity. Warmth is the promise that when darkness comes, you still have a place to sit, breathe, and prepare tomorrow's tasks. And Hestia? She becomes part of that larger mosaic, not a goddess isolated in Greek mythology, but one bead in a global pattern humans have woven around fire since time began. Her stillness becomes easier to understand when you see it alongside these other traditions. She wasn't the goddess who moved mountains. She was the goddess who ensured there was always a mountain to return to. The night deepens. A faint breeze stirs the branches above you. Somewhere in the city, the public hearth continues to glow, and for a moment, you imagine it connected by threads of warmth to every other hearth on earth, past, present, mythical, spiritual, a vast constellation of fires, and Hestia sits right at the center of the Greek one. You breathe out slowly. The whole world feels quieter now, as if every flame has lowered its voice so you can hear the heartbeat under the glow. You rise from beneath the olive tree. brushing a little dust from your hands, and begin walking back toward the city. The night has settled fully now, draping every rooftop and courtyard in a soft, blue quiet. The public hearth still burns in the distance, a single ember of gold in a landscape of shadows. As you draw closer, you feel another layer of meaning unfurl around you, one that stretches beyond households, beyond rituals, beyond travel, and even beyond myth. This time, the warmth doesn't pull you toward daily life or community life. It pulls you inward, toward the landscape of thought. Philosophers in Greece loved metaphors. Give them a shadow, a stone, a cup of wine, and they'd find a way to build an entire worldview out of it. And the hearth? Oh, that was irresistible. The gentlest fire of all became one of their favorite reference points for understanding the mind, the soul, and the strange symphony of human behavior. A mainstream historical fact appears like a spark catching dry kindling. Ancient thinkers often used the hearth as a symbol of inner composure, the steady point within a person that remained calm, even when the rest of life spun like a badly greased cartwheel. For them, Hestia wasn't just the goddess of literal fire. She was the guardian of metaphorical balance, the warm anchor inside every individual. You picture a philosopher sitting near a hearth, stroking his beard with exaggerated seriousness, murmuring, "As the flame is to the house, so is the mind to the body." His students would nod thoughtfully, half understanding the point and half wondering whether lunch would be served soon. Then a quirky interpretive tradition slips in, soft and unexpected. Some later writers described the hearth as the quiet center of the soul, a space where one could retreat from impulsive thoughts and emotional storms. They even suggested that a person with strong inner calm was lit by Hestia, as if the goddess of warmth moonlighted as a therapist specializing in self-regulation. Imagine telling someone today, "You seem really centered, your inner hearth is definitely in good shape." Honestly, it's not a terrible compliment. Historians still argue whether these philosophical interpretations were widely understood by the public or mostly confined to educated circles. Some insist the symbolism was universal. Others argue it was niche, used only by scholars who couldn't resist weaving cosmic meaning into domestic architecture. But as you stand by the public hearth again, feeling the fire's soft pulse settle into your chest, it's hard not to see how naturally the metaphor fits. You place your hand near the flame and notice how it stabilizes your breathing. The warmth has no agenda. It doesn't tell you how to think or what to believe. It just exists with patient consistency. And you understand, maybe for the first time, why philosophers latched onto it as a symbol for the kind of inner life they hoped to cultivate. The world of ancient Greece wasn't quiet. Politics, trade, storms, conflicts, everything jostled for attention. People argued at markets, debated at assemblies, traded coin, traded insults, worried about crops, worried about omens. But at the center of each home, each city, each ritual, the flame remained the one thing that didn't shout. It glowed. It warmed. It endured. Imagine Socrates, leaning over a cup of wine, joking that humans chase distractions the way sparks leap from logs quickly, brightly, and without direction. But the wise person always returns to the steady glow. He'd probably follow this with a very confusing analogy about shoemakers, but you get the point. A soft joke floats into your mind as you lean down to poke the fire gently with a stick. If ancient philosophers used the hearth as a metaphor for inner peace, then modern philosophers would almost certainly compare the mind to a laptop overheating under too many tabs. But Hestia's version is nicer, much warmer, much less judgmental about your browsing history. You sit on a stone step and watch the hearth long enough to lose track of time. The longer you observe it, the more you realize how many human qualities the flame mirrors. It rises when tended, falters when neglected, responds to attention but doesn't demand it. It doesn't burn aggressively unless fed recklessly. It thrives on balance, airflow, patience. It teaches without speaking, and it comforts without promising anything except warmth. Historians still debate whether ancient people truly meditated, at least in the modern sense of the word. There's little direct evidence. But watching the fire now, you can easily imagine someone sitting here late at night, staring into the embers, letting thoughts loosen and drift like smoke. No formal doctrine, no strict posture, just a quiet conversation between a human being and a flame that asks absolutely nothing of them. You take a slow breath, letting the warmth brush your fingertips, and feel a soft alignment inside your chest. Tiny, almost imperceptible, as if your own thoughts are falling into a rhythm the hearth has known for centuries. And then, the realization comes gently, like someone setting a warm cup of tea into your hands. Hestia doesn't just keep the home steady, she keeps you steady. Her flame is both literal and symbolic, an external warmth and an internal compass, reminding you that calm is not passive, it's practiced. You look into the embers one more time and feel a small, quiet truth settle into place. The world is full of storms, but every storm demands a center. And Hestia is that center within the city, within the home, and, if you let her be, within you. You sit with that quiet truth for a long moment, letting the warmth from the hearth soak into your hands until the night feels less like darkness and more like a soft blanket stretching across the city. Eventually, you rise again, not because the fire has stopped comforting you, but because something gentle nudges you onward, an almost physical sense that there is one more layer of Hestia's presence to understand. Not in myth, not in ritual, not in philosophy, but in the lived reality of the people who shaped their lives around a goddess who stayed put. You wander along a narrow lane lined with small homes, each one glowing faintly from within. The city has quieted down. Children have been tucked under woven blankets. Pets curl up near sleeping mats. Even the goats normally determined to cause chaos at all hours have settled into docile little lumps of fur. And in every doorway, in every window, in every open courtyard, you catch that same soft flicker of light. It hits you slowly. When a goddess never moves, the world moves gently around her. You step into a home you haven't visited before. The layout is familiar, loom, jars, baskets, but the energy feels different. Each household shapes itself around its particular rhythm, its particular needs, its particular people. Yet the hearth remains the constant in the room, and the room shapes itself accordingly. You notice how benches orient themselves toward the flame, how tools and storage cluster within easy reach, how the open space fans outward like a sunburst. Every decision flows outward from the center. A mainstream historical fact arrives. Greek homes were often built around an oikos, a central concept encompassing not just the physical household, but the family line, property, labor, and identity. Hestia's hearth symbolized that core. She wasn't just a guardian of the fire. She was the stabilizing principle around which domestic life arranged itself. In a society obsessed with lineage, duty, and continuity, having a deity dedicated to keeping things steady wasn't just comforting, it was essential. You watch a woman position a clay pot a precise distance from the flames. She doesn't measure anything. She doesn't use a tool. She simply knows. This is the spot where the pot will simmer slowly without boiling over. This is the angle where it'll catch just enough heat. Her movements feel like a dance choreographed over years, quietly governed by the central fire. Then comes the quirky detail, slipping in like the scent of rosemary carried by the wind. In some regions, the arrangement of household furniture was considered part of Hestia's domain. People believed the goddess preferred symmetrical spaces or certain pathways left clear, allowing warmth to circulate freely. Whether or not this was universally practiced, you can imagine the domestic debates. We should move the table. Hestia won't like it. How do you know? She just won't. Sometimes religion isn't about fear, it's about winning an argument with a spouse. Historians still argue whether these layout traditions were truly widespread or just regional quirks by households who anthropomorphized their divine roommate. But looking around this quiet home, you sense the deeper pattern. When the flame stays in one place, the home adjusts itself over time, like a plant turning toward light. You wander further, watching how each member interacts with the room. An elder warms her hands, murmuring a small thanks. A boy arranges his toy animals in a careful line, all facing the fire as if receiving instruction from the goddess herself. A teenager brushes soot from the hearthstones, pretending not to care but taking great pride in the symmetry. The father tightens a loose hinge on a storage box, humming softly. Every action, every moment is gravitationally linked to the hearth. You sit on a low bench and let the space wash over you. It strikes you that in a world full of movement trade routes, seasonal work, political upheavals, traveling merchants, a stable center wasn't just helpful, it was revolutionary. When everything else shifted, the hearth stayed. When news arrived from far-off islands or distant wars, it was received here at the fire. When someone was born, they were welcomed by the fire. When someone died, they were mourned beside it. Hestia wasn't the goddess of drama. She was the goddess of transitions, quiet, tender, powerful. You exhale slowly and feel the air soften around you. The flame reflects in your eyes, and you begin to see how an unmoving goddess could subtly reshape people's behavior. If she refused to chase power or adventure, then perhaps the home became elevated in value. If she sought no temples of her own, then perhaps household rituals became more meaningful. If she stayed still, then maybe the message became clear. Staying put is not lesser. Stillness is not absence. Patience is not passivity. You watch the flame lean gently toward a breeze that slips through the window. It doesn't fight it. It simply reshapes itself, always anchored at the base. You can't help but think, humans could learn a lot from a goddess who responds without reacting. A soft joke curls into your thoughts, warm as the embers. If Hestia taught a modern life coaching class, the syllabus would just be, stop running around, sit down and drink something warm. And half the world would sign up immediately. You lean closer, watching the ember bed glow deeper, richer. You feel the hearth's breath, yes, breath, like a gentle tide of heat brushing your skin, and you realize that all the city's motion, all the community's rituals, all the home's daily tasks orbit around this unwavering point of light. The goddess didn't shape the world by moving. She shaped it by giving the world something to move around. And as you sit in this small room, wrapped in firelight, you begin to feel the truth settle quietly inside you. Sometimes the greatest power lies in simply staying where you are and burning steadily. You remain seated by the hearth a moment longer, letting the warmth settle into your shoulders, your breath, the quiet spaces between your thoughts. The home around you has dimmed into late-night softness, the kind of hush that wraps itself around furniture, clay pots, and half-finished chores like a protective cloak. Even the faint crackle of the fire seems hushed now, as if whispering instead of speaking. And in this gentle silence, something shifts. You begin to sense your own place within all of this, not as an observer, not as a wanderer passing through, but as someone being quietly invited closer. You shift your weight and feel the floor's cool stone meet the heat radiating from the hearth. You've spent so much time exploring homes, festivals, cities, myths, and philosophies, but now, finally, you're sitting still long enough for the warmth to truly reach you. And for the first time, you begin to understand how deeply Hestia's presence is meant to be felt. A mainstream historical fact emerges gently. Many ancient Greek households welcomed new members, infants, spouses, even honored guests by bringing them to the hearth first. No speeches, no ceremonies. Just a shared moment of warmth meant to say, this is your place now. Belonging wasn't declared, it was warmed into you. You picture yourself in that ritual, the glow brushing across your cheek, the flicker of light acknowledging you in a way words never could. And for a brief moment, the room feels like it expands to make space for you, not physically, but emotionally, the way familiar places always know how to adjust themselves when someone new steps inside with an open heart. A quirky detail floats in, soft and playful. Some households placed a small stool near the hearth, specifically for visitors, believing that offering someone the warmest seat was both a gesture of hospitality and a subtle test of character. If the visitor squirmed uncomfortably or rejected the warmth, people joked that they were all ice inside. You glance down at the warm spot beneath you now and think, well, at least I passed the test. Historians still argue whether these traditions were widely practiced or just common in certain regions. But sitting here, listening to the fire's slow exhale, the truth feels obvious, whether literal or symbolic. Every culture finds its own way to say, you belong here. You lean back slightly and watch the embers shift from gold to copper to a deeper, pulsing red. They remind you of a heartbeat, slow, steady, unconcerned with anything except continuing. And something inside you instinctively aligns with that rhythm. Like your own pulse is syncing with the ancient cadence of the room. You think back to all the places you visited tonight. The bustling agora, the roadside shrine, the quiet courtyard, the festival filled with laughter. Everywhere you went, the warmth followed, not always physically, but as a sensation, a memory, a quiet reassurance that you could return to it whenever you needed. Hestia doesn't chase anyone, but her warmth waits, and waits, and waits. A soft joke drifts in, uninvited but welcome. If Hestia ran a modern customer service desk, every answer would be, have you tried sitting down near a warm light source? And honestly, she'd be right 90% of the time. You draw a slow breath. The room feels heavier in the nicest way, like the atmosphere itself is encouraging you to exhale longer, soften your shoulders further, unclench your jaw as if you've been carrying tension since several reincarnations ago. And as the firelight stretches across the floor, reaching toward you like a sleepy invitation, you realize something profound. You're no longer studying how Hestia kept every hearth warm. You're feeling it. You're inside it. You're experiencing the exact thing ancient people felt when they paused, even briefly, near her flame. You let that warmth surround you, circle you, ease into your thoughts. You allow yourself to imagine staying here a little longer, not as a guest, but as someone who belongs. And the flame seems to recognize that shift. It flickers once, softly, in a way that feels almost affectionate. The air grows thicker, calmer, softer. Your breaths lengthen on their own. The edges of the room blur, not from darkness, but from reassurance, like your eyes no longer need to stay alert. And Hestia's presence deepens into something almost tender, a warmth that stops being symbolic and becomes simply yours. And now, gently, patiently, the fire leads you toward rest. Wind down, 300 words. The hearth glows lower now, settling into that deep red quiet that signals the end of the day. The warmth softens, stretching itself thin and velvety across the room, until it feels less like heat and more like a blanket gently draped across your shoulders. You breathe into it, slowly, feeling each inhale loosen the muscles you'd forgotten were tight, feeling each exhale melt into the silence like warm wax. The shadows on the walls sway in unhurried arcs, no longer dancing, just drifting like leaves on a calm river, moving because the world itself moves gently around them. The crackle of the fire becomes softer too, turning into a faint, rhythmic whisper, a steady, comforting sound, a reminder that warmth doesn't have to be bright to be present. You imagine the ancient world settling around you for the night, distant homes dimming, city streets quieting, travelers curling beside roadside fires, each one holding its own small circle of safety. Countless hearths glowing softly in the dark, each one warmed by the same idea, the same presence, the same goddess who never needed to walk anywhere to make the world feel held. And you, here, breathing slowly, near a flame that expects nothing from you, nothing but rest. Let your thoughts drift the way embers drift upward, untethered and unhurried. Let your body sink a little deeper, like settling into a comfortable memory. Let the warmth at your center, your own quiet hearth, glow just enough to hold you steady as sleep gathers around your edges. You are safe here. You are warm here. You are home here. And as the last ember dims into a soft golden sigh, the world eases itself into stillness with you. End of script. Sweet dreams.